So I've been pretty open about my ongoing battle with this issue on my YouTube channel, and a couple years ago, I made a video on how to combat self-harm. And at the end of this video, I'm going to respond to that video and share my updated thoughts on that particular video, because I no longer agree with everything I said in that video. I think it was pretty ignorant and naive, even though I felt very strongly about my opinions in those videos. So I'm going to kind of share my changed opinions on some of the things I said in that video. But in this video, I'm talking from the other end, where I'm addressing a person who has a partner or some kind of loved one, a child, a friend who struggles with self-harm and wants to know how to be more proactive in their lives and support them with this addiction they're struggling with, because it is an addiction. And so I have 5 thoughts here on how to support a partner with self-harm, or who self-harms. And they are my opinion. They are based on anecdotal evidence and personal experience and things that I would find helpful or things I would want other people to know. I don't know if these are things a therapist would recommend. I am not a licensed professional. I've never claimed to be one, etc., so don't sue me if these things don't work for you. But if you struggle with self-harm, or if you have a partner who struggles with self-harm, let me know if you found these things helpful or if you would find these things helpful. So, I was initially inspired to make this video because I have somebody very close in my life who has directly asked me, how do I stop you from hurting yourself? And that inspired me to collect a bunch of my thoughts into 5 different points on things I would do if I had a partner who was self-harming, and things that I personally would find helpful myself. And also, I do have a number of friends who struggle with these kinds of behaviors as well, so I would have opportunity to employ these skills or thoughts. And then another thing I have to get out of the way, if you are triggered by mention of self-harm, I'm going to be as vague as possible because I want to be helpful and reach a wider audience and not just talk about my personal experience. But if these things are triggering to you, why did you click on this video? That's a dumb move on you. But trigger warning, you don't have to watch this video. Click away if these things bother you. Okay. So, the first point on my list is you cannot fix them. You cannot stop your partner from self-harming. You cannot stop your partner from self-harming by hiding their weapons, or constantly supervising them. The only person who can stop themselves is themselves. Your partner is the only person who can stop themselves from self-harming. And trying to supervise them constantly or hide their weapons is just going to create resentment and make this person less trusting of you. And trust is key to supporting a partner with this addiction. Trust is key to supporting anybody with any addiction, because they have to see you as a safe person to open up to. And if you are just taking away their weapons and just constantly supervising them, it's gonna kind of make them feel like a caged animal. And also, as harmful as it sounds, it's gonna make them feel like you're punishing them by taking things away from them or constantly supervising them. And that gets into point number 2. Don't punish them, and don't make base threats. So these might be, I kind of wrote these as the same thing, but don't make threats and don't punish, because in a way, self-harm is already the punishment. So do not add on to this self-harm. Do not add on to the punishment by punishing your partner. Your partner is already punishing themselves. Don't do this. And this is where we get into some icky territory, where is breaking up with this person equivalent to punishing them? So this is very antithetical to myself, because I struggle with self-harm and I am deathly afraid of being abandoned. But self-harm is grounds for a breakup. That it is a valid reason to break up with somebody. I don't think I would. It's not something I would personally find a deal breaker, but it can absolutely be a deal breaker. And because at the end of the day, even though it's all my body, my choice, your partner is hurting somebody, even if it is themselves, but your partner is hurting somebody, and that indirectly hurts you, and that puts a lot of stress and anxiety and trauma onto you if your partner is hurting somebody. And that is, if you find that you are not mentally capable of handling this or coping with this, that is a completely valid reason to break up. And you do have to be really careful in things like this. So don't approach it by saying, if you don't stop, I'm going to break up with you, or I can't date you if you do this. just decide to break up with them, or don't, like, okay, if you have to break up with them over this, break up with them. Don't pose it as a threat. Don't pose it as a punishment to their self-harm. Let them know that you're just not mentally prepared to deal with it. You're not emotionally capable of supporting them through this, and it is taking a toll on your own anxiety and your own mental health, and that is painful. That is painful, but it is a lot more valid than saying, don't do XYZ or I will break up with you. That is a terrible thing to do. That creates more anxiety, and that will lead to more self-harm from them. That will lead them to punish themselves more. What else did I write here? Yeah, don't make threats. Your partner is sick. Your partner has an addiction. Oh, okay, so here's another common thing that people have said to me or done to me. They have said, if you hurt yourself, I'm going to start hurting myself. Please do not do this. It's very common. A lot of people who self-harm have had people address them like this. Do not do this. Your partner is sick. Your partner has an addiction, and this is kind of beyond their control. Like, they can't exactly make a conscious decision to stop doing this. And you can't. You don't have this addiction. You can choose to self-harm or not. And if you create a feedback loop of every time your partner self-harms, you're going to hurt yourself. First of all, you're going to give yourself a self-harm addiction. And second of all, you're going to create a lot more shame and guilt, which are both emotions that fuel self-harm. If you guilt them into not self-harming because you're going to self-harm yourself, that's just going to create more guilt. It's going to make them be more private and probably self-harm more because, again, there are many reasons people self-harm, but common motivations are guilt and shame and punishing themselves, punishing their bodies, punishing their brains. And if you give them more reasons to feel like they need to punish themselves, if you create more shame and more guilt, it's just going to exacerbate the problem. So do not make threats. Do not combat it with, if you hurt yourself, I'm gonna hurt myself. Don't do that. Number 3, let's see. Number 3, ignore the issue. Or, okay, so let me be careful with what I'm saying. Do not ignore or minimize the issue. Now, if you don't want to hear about your partner self-harming because it is very anxiety-inducing, if that's a boundary for you, like, if you want to keep that. Sorry, somebody just sent me an Evil Age Gap grooming song on Discord. Only on Discord, fellas. But if that is a boundary for you, if you cannot handle hearing about your partner self-harming, but you still want to be in your partner's life and you don't want to break up with them, you could tell them, hey, I can't hear about this. Please keep this between you and your therapist. That is fine. That is a completely understandable and recognizable boundary to have. But if you try to brush off their self-harm, because a lot of people see self-harm as attention seeking, and I would say 9 times out of 10, it is not. It is a cry for help. It is an addiction. It is not attention seeking. Now, if you're in a relationship with somebody who says, if you don't do XYZ, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to cut myself, run far and run fast. In most cases, they don't actually have a self-harm problem. They are just incredibly manipulative. And even if they do have a self-harm problem, that is not a good way to impose it on you. That is not loving. That is not appropriate. Stay away from that person. And even if it is, even if this is somebody you are in a relationship with and they are threatening to hurt themselves if you don't do something, don't give in to them because it's not your fault. But most of the time, self-harm is not meant to be attention-seeking. So reacting to somebody self-harming by treating it like not a big deal, by trying to ignore it because it's just attention-seeking, that is also going to make the problem worse. A lot of people who self-harm, I speak from personal experience and based on kind of what I've seen from other people, but a lot of people who self-harm don't see the problem as catastrophically as a loved one does. So, for instance, in my experience, the people in my life, when I have opened up to them about my struggles, they have freaked out, they have acted like it was a huge deal and like I should get immediate and instant help and like it's an emergency, and I have never seen it that way. And that doesn't mean I'm in the right. I'm absolutely not in the right, but I do not need somebody to reinforce my delusions of this isn't a big deal by saying, oh yeah, it's not a big deal, like I don't really care. So don't try to minimize or diminish the problem, because part of this addiction is the brain decides I'm not hurting myself enough, I'm not sick enough, I am not doing enough, and that's just going to put them in more danger and feel like they have to do more to cry for help because you are not seeing how much they're struggling. So you absolutely set boundaries. I can't talk about this right now, I don't want to hear about the self-harm right now, or please give me a warning before you want to talk to me about this, but don't minimize it or diminish it or ignore it. That'll just also exacerbate it. Okay, so now I have a couple of like, do this. So number 1, do positive reinforcement. So, this hasn't exactly helped for me, but I've also not exactly been in a stable environment where it would work. But I put it down here. Congratulate them for being clean. Set goals, perhaps, for each milestone of being clean. Like one, depending on how severe it is, every week, or like a week of being clean, a month of being clean, 6 months of being clean, whatever you think is necessary for you, whatever you want to do for your partner. Be consistent. This is also really important. So set goals for each milestone and reward them. Be consistent. So if here's why this positive reinforcement doesn't work on me very well, because I have such intense anxiety that if somebody congratulates me for being a month clean or being 3 months clean, it freaks me out. It makes me think the longer I'm clean, the worse I'm going to disappoint them when I relapse, and it just makes me more anxious, and then I end up relapsing just to get it out of the way because it's going to happen anyways, and I just don't want to disappoint them. And if I can do it in private quickly, I'm going to do that. So I have a lot of anxiety when it comes to people trying to support me and positively reinforce my behavior because I'm afraid of disappointing them. And this is why it's really important to be consistent, because it's an addiction, and addictions tend to be on and off and lifelong, so there's likely going to be a relapse. And if you have chosen to positively reinforce your partner by celebrating their milestones, celebrate those milestones again, to remind them that they are not ruined, they have not destroyed themselves by relapsing. Relapsing is not giving up. Don't let them give up. Celebrate their milestones over again when your partner reaches the milestones again. And this, let me know if this doesn't work for you as a person who self-harms. So far, it hasn't worked for me just because I've never been in a stable enough place to trust that somebody positively reinforcing me is going to be consistent with that. So I've never really been in a situation where that has happened to me. I also find it a little bit condescending, but it also does come from my own delusions that, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Why are you treating it like a little celebratory thing? Because it is celebratory, and it does warrant some kind of, cringy congratulations. It is a feat to withhold yourself from something you're addicted to. And then number 5, ask them to immediately talk to you afterwards. Okay, so in my life, I've had actually multiple friends tell me to go to them when I have the urge to self-harm. Nobody has said, call me afterwards or talk to me afterward. Well, okay, I mean, somebody sort of has, but like, did they mean, I don't know, whatever. But I find this is something I would do if I had a friend struggling, or if I had a loved one struggling with self-harm or something self-destructive. I would say, tell me when you do afterwards, because the thing about urges, and this is more my thing, I don't really recognize urges until it's already too late and I've already hurt myself, and I'm really anxious about, like, my urges are like daily or every couple of days, and I'm not hurting myself every day, but I'm having urges like every couple of days, and I'm really anxious about putting a lot of unnecessary stress. And I feel like also if you want somebody to talk to you about urges, it can be very anxiety inducing, because you feel like you're battling somebody who's like holding a knife right now, and you have to like put the knife down, put the knife away. You have to like kind of stop them from doing that. There's this build up and anxiety of they're about to do something, you have to stop them. But if they already have done it and they're done and now they're talking to you, you don't have the anxiety of, oh, I have to stop them from doing it. They've already done it, and what you should do afterwards is comfort them, because, and this is why it's really important to constantly give them positive reinforcement throughout them being clean, and even when they relapse, it's really important to not punish them, not scold them, because again, that will just create more shame and guilt, make them more private, and make the problem worse. And these are really difficult to do. It is super difficult to maintain a level head if your partner is actively hurting themselves. It's really hard to do. I completely get it. But I find that if you want to be there to support somebody right after they hurt themselves, it's kind of a way to hold them accountable so that they don't fatally injure themselves. Like, I don't want you to hurt yourself, but I can't stop you, but just don't kill yourself, because afterwards I want to talk to you and you could talk to me about it and I can help you and support you, and I can't do that if you're dead. So it's kind of a way to, you know, keep them alive and check them and all these things. Being present after a relapse and positively reinforcing them when they are clean. That is all meant to create a safe environment where they feel comfortable opening up to you about their addiction without the risk of being shamed or punished or not taken seriously. This is all to create a safe environment. And factors like shame, self-hatred, and instability are all exacerbators of self-harm. And then the opposite, self-respect, stability, a sense of safety, a sense of being loved by somebody else, those are all emotions that combat self-harm and reduce urges. So it doesn't completely take it away, and there will always be triggers in this person's life that might drive them to relapse. But if they're in a safe environment, or like an emotionally safe and supportive environment, that reduces the harm and honestly the urges of doing this. I find that I have way fewer urges when I'm in a stable environment, and a lot of this is my own doing. Like, I'm not blaming other people for being in an unstable environment. A lot of this is my own choice, getting myself into unstable situations. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now that I've finished like all 5 points. Okay, so if you just wanted to be here for the 5 points, again, to reiterate, you cannot fix your partner. Please do not make threats. That is never effective. Do not ignore or minimize what your partner's doing. Do positively reinforce and celebrate their wins. And try to get them to talk to you about what they're going through after they've already done it instead of during urges. So yeah, that's all you needed to know. And now I'm going to talk about the video I made a couple of years ago. So a couple of years ago, I made a video about self-harm that kind of generally covered unconventional forms of self-harm that I have done, how I cured my self-harm, which was very naive and hilarious that I made a video like that at the time, and a thought toward the end of the video about self-harm and trying to tie it into Christianity, because I have tried to consistently tie in my thoughts with Christianity or something the Bible has to say in my video, and I'm gonna address that first. I think it was a mistake to bring up, I believe it was like a 1 Corinthians verse, 1 Corinthians 6:19, but watch the video and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was essentially a verse about how your body is a temple to the Lord, and it's not your body. A lot of Christians who don't understand mental illness will often moralize an addiction or a mental health issue and say, oh, this is a sin. Hurting yourself is a sin. Being constantly depressed and anxious is a sin, because Peter says, I think 1 Peter something says, and cast all your cares upon him, for he cares for you. So you shouldn't have anxiety. Anxiety is a sin. You shouldn't be suicidal because wanting to kill yourself is a sin, because your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. It's not yours. It's not. And what they don't understand about this mental illness is it is built upon shame, it is built upon self-loathing and guilt, and you are just making it worse, and you are exacerbating it. And God is a loving God who does not want to see you in pain, and understands your soul, and understands what you're going through, and understands you are not being rebellious, you are not trying to smite him or spite him. He understands that you are struggling, you are going through a trial, and he is here to support you through a trial. And he is the perfect supporter and perfect provider, and he's absolutely not going to shame you for an addiction you're going through. So, I no longer agree with, like, moralizing self-harm like that. I have not found it to be conducive or helpful. Another thing I want to talk about is getting help for self-harm. So something I wanted to talk about in point number 2, it's a valid reason to break up with somebody who self-harms if they're not getting help for it. I am not getting help for self-harm, and I actually said that in my previous clip, and then I realized that's actually not true. I actually am getting help for it. I am no longer seeking a professional's help for self-harm because I have not found it to be helpful. Every time I've opened up to a professional about self-harm, the conversation has usually gone like, okay, well, how about you stop doing that? Or I'm worried that if you continue to do it, it's going to get worse. And yeah, duh. But I haven't found it to be very helpful, and I've kind of only found it to be frustrating and shame-inducing to open up about it to a therapist, because most of the ones I've met have not been able to really help me with it, and it just tends to make the problem worse when I open up to them about self-harming, because none of them really took it seriously, because I think they just run into so many patients who self-harm and none of them take it seriously, and that just made me want to do it more, to kind of cry for help and show them that I really do need help. So I do actually have a dialectical behavioral therapy journal that I have been using to sort of attempt to combat self-harm, but even that hasn't been the most helpful because, and this is something I actually learned somewhat recently, dialectical behavioral therapy, while it can work for a lot of different people, for a lot of different things, it was designed to help people with personality disorders, especially like borderline personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder is a little bit harder, but it's to deal with people with personality disorders who struggle with overwhelming emotions, and while I struggle with overwhelming emotions, they usually come from a different place in my mind. So I've kind of recognized more recently that I probably have OCD, and I mean, if you've been a part of my YouTube channel for a while, you might remember I made a video like 3.5 years ago called Compulsive Overexercising, where I talk about my experience with compulsively exercising. So without really realizing it, I've been struggling with OCD symptoms for a really long time, and the way I view self-harm is it's often compulsive, and it can't be remedied with, oh, I'm having an overwhelming emotion right now, I can go and distract myself, because I can't really distract myself. It's kind of a persistent thought, and it won't go away until I actually do the compulsion. Otherwise, it's going to bother me and just ruin my night, or just sit in my head and not do anything, or it's going to sit in my head, distract me for the rest of the day, which has happened in the past. And therefore, my dialectical behavioral therapy journal has not been 100% helpful with my self-harm issue. So at the moment, I am just kind of struggling to get help with it. And when I'm saying all these things, please do open up to a therapist about harm. Please don't follow my poor examples. The reason I've chosen to stop disclosing it to therapists is because I've found it to be personally unhelpful, and I found it to actually just make it worse, and in order to kind of self-preserve myself, I've just stopped disclosing it to therapists, because I haven't found any therapist who's been able to help me. And I've seen I'm on my sixth one at this point, okay, so I've been around the block. Another thing I talked about in my video, okay, here's another thing I wanted to talk about. I was in denial that I had an addiction for years. So when I first started self-harming for like the first few weeks, I did not believe it was an addiction because I thought I was consciously able to stop it. And while I might have been consciously able to stop it, I clearly wasn't. And I actually have changed my mind. I think that I had an addiction even before I started self-harming. The first time I ever self-harmed was in December 2021, and that was almost 3 years ago at this point. And I had obsessive thoughts of cutting myself months before that. And what that did is it created a space in my mind for this to now be approved, for this to be okay, and for this to be a possible solution. So in my head, I'd kind of already given myself the okay to do this before I actually started doing it. The first time I ever self-harmed was in December 2021. The second time I ever self-harmed was in December 2022. So there was like a huge gap between the first time I did and the second time I did. And that was due to a variety of different factors, but I still had that addiction. I just didn't have any triggers that pushed me to the edge again to do that. And by 2023, I'd reached a point where I was kind of doing it on a daily basis, and then I had to switch to a weekly basis due to some, obvious spatial issues going on. And even then, when I made that video in January 2020, I think it was January, correct me if I'm wrong, I forgot, it might have been April. I don't even remember. I think it might have actually been April or March. But when I made that video about self-harming and how I had cured it, I had talked to my roommate at the time about my self-harm, and she said, okay, well, if you don't want to stop now, just fake it, pretend you want to stop, and then act like you want to stop and just don't do it. And I mean, I did do that for a while, but it wasn't a long-term solution. But anyways, when I made that video back then, if I were to wear t-shirts and shorts, you would have had no idea I had this issue. But now, if I wear t-shirts and shorts, you can tell that I have had an issue. And so therefore, you could say that the problem has gotten a lot worse. But more, it's just persisted for so long that when I have new triggers in my life, I will just react more severely than I have in the past. And I don't really have a solution, but I'm just saying that, like, my video about, like, how to stop self-harm, I didn't really give very good ideas in that video. I do not have good ideas. I do not have solutions for this issue. Look on websites, talk to a therapist about it. Hopefully you'll have better therapists than I've had, but if you struggle with self-harm, please do reach out to somebody you can trust. Don't see yourself as just crying for attention. It's really important that you get help for this issue, because it is a very dangerous addiction. You are doing lasting damage, but you could also fatally injure yourself, and while you might think you want that, that is also a problem, and you don't actually want that. That's just the illness talking. You don't really want that. Oh, another thing I talked about in my video was unconventional forms of self-sabotage and self-harm. So something I didn't realize at the time is one way I self-harm is oversharing. I'll overshare to people, and I'll overshare to the wrong people, so that it'll kind of bite me in the butt later when I'm having a good time and I'm just relaxing and not in a self-destructive headspace. These people that I've told secrets in the past will kind of just expose me or shame me or humiliate me because of things that I shouldn't have told them, because they were not safe people to tell. And in that sense, it's a really effective form of self-sabotage and self-harm, because it is really damaging when that happens to me and when people violate my privacy like that because I've overshared to them. And it's a way to, like, humiliate myself and to punish myself. Other things I've done. So one thing I talked about was sleep, and how sleep deprivation was one way in which I punished myself. If I wasn't productive in the day, I didn't deserve to sleep at a normal time. And now I have this thing where, again, like with the OCD thing, I have these obsessions, or I have these compulsions. I need to do a certain amount of chores before bed, or else I'm not going to feel productive, and then I don't deserve to sleep, and I'm going to feel guilty for sleeping. Very healthy mindset, I know, right? But what actually ended up helping me, and I don't necessarily recommend for this because most websites advise you not to do this, but for me, this has been helpful, going to sleep at very different times. Like, so recognizing when I'm tired and going to sleep when I'm tired. So if I am feeling tired around 7, I'm going to start getting ready for bed, and then I'll be in bed by 8 or 9. That is really early, but I found it to be more effective. And even if I'm lying awake for maybe an hour and I wake up really early in the morning, at least I have sort of gone to bed earlier before my compulsions have taken over, before my obsessions have taken over, and then I'm not going to get stuck in a compulsion circle or some kind of thought circle where I'm really uncomfortable and staying up until 1 or 2 in the morning. And then sometimes I end up staying up until 1 or 2 in the morning because I found talking to friends really helps. If I am staying up until 1 or 2 talking to a friend, I feel really exhausted afterwards, and then I'm like, look, it's too late to start your workout routine or read your Bible or write a couple chapters of your story. And yes, reading my Bible has actually kind of become like a compulsive routine and not just something that I have wanted to do out of having a relationship with God. It did kind of turn to a compulsion, which was very damaging to my spiritual growth, but it is what it is, and compulsions suck. I don't want to be trapped in them. But I have found that listening to my body when it's tired and just going to sleep whenever I'm tired has been really helpful for me, and then I don't have to feel like I have to, like, keeping a schedule makes it worse and fuels the compulsion. So not keeping a sleep schedule and, again, just going to sleep whenever I'm tired actually was really helpful for me. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's just a really long video. I apologize, but also you're welcome, I suppose. And I hope you found this helpful. I have nothing else to say. I think my eyes look really good in this lighting. That's all I have to say. Okay, bye. I love you.